あれ。約束1、部屋を明るくしてみよう。約束2、テレビから離れてみよう。約束3、繰り返し見たいときは一度目を休めてからにしよう。
In fact, the initial idea came from answering just 3 questions. 3 things the public say. 1, I haven't got the room. 2, I'll never be able to manage it. And 3, it's too expensive. Micro-layouts are the answer because 1, the space they need is nothing. They're no bigger than a pocket handkerchief in some are even smaller. 2, all the materials used in these micro-layouts are simply bits and pieces picked up here and there. And 3, it's not expensive, because most micro-layouts come in at a budget of under 700 francs. With this initial concept, and using a 30 by 40 base, anyone can develop their own layout, either with old steam trains, with wagons and buildings from the heyday of the steam era, or a modern narrow-gauge railway with industrial buildings such as can still be seen in France. The icing on the cake of the micro-layouts that I've made is that I always try to achieve something, technically speaking, by including some movement. So, for example, on the mine, there's a little turntable which allows the engine to access the different galleries, which are in turn lit with a system of mirrors. The layout recreates the maintenance and service buildings attached to a working mine, Le Rochon, which is run and owned by La Générale Minière. In an effort to reduce costs, the larger pieces required for the extraction of the coal are not taken down the mine shaft by lift, but are transported on special trains that run throughout the galleries. It's an unusual geological feature which has allowed the company to carry out their handling procedures at reduced cost. Material can enter or leave the pit through various openings in the galleries themselves. All these galleries are served by narrow gauge lines accessed by a turntable. The trains are short but heavily charged, which implies the use of heavy caliber electric motors. In the period immediately following the Second World War, the Marquis of Pineda, a reputed wine grower, met and married the lovely Linda. She was the daughter of a scrap merchant, who among his stock possessed a large quantity of material which had come from the 60cm gauge railways. The Marquis, a fervent lover of progress and anything modern, jumped at the opportunity of installing a railway line on his property, thereby becoming the first producer in his region to use the railway to assist him in the production of his wine. His vineyards are located in a place picturesquely known as the Cellars of the Parched Throat, situated between Chinon and Pazou in the French department of the Indre-et-Loire. The wine produced is the Chinon. The cellar, carved out of the tuff, a rock composed of fine volcanic fragments and dust, and the adjoining residence are masterpieces of troglodyte art. Let's make the most of this lovely sunny afternoon to admire the work of the Ruston Hornsby shunter that the workforce nicknamed Grangousier, something akin to fat gobbler, thanks to its petrol consumption. Technically, the layout includes a triangle for turning, highly practical for carrying out all the wagon manoeuvres, and allowing the shunter to position itself back at the head of the train. control of the points and the opening and closing of the cellar door are carried out via a system of rods hidden under the layout.
J'ai réalisé la mine dans le cadre du défi J'aime voile libre.
I am in part responsible for the rules that govern the J'aime voile libre challenge.
C'est moi qui ai conçu le règlement de ce
I created the mine because I wanted to have a go like the contestants and to make my own layout. When I wrote the competition rules, I defined the size as length and width 30 by 40 centimetres.
30 sur 40 cm. Et
I specified in the rules that the height was unlimited. To my mind, this meant that you could have an elevated crossing, for example.
lorsque le règlement
But when the rules appeared in the magazine Loco-Revue, I reread them, and the phrase unlimited height inspired me. I said to myself, there's a gag in all this. What about making a layout that's very narrow and very high? And that's how the idea of the mine came to me.
il faut prendre toute cette réalisation comme un
You need to look at this whole layout as my joke, and particularly the story of creating a layout at the bottom of the gallery, 30 centimetres from the ground. It forces the spectators to bend down, to kneel on the ground to look at it. Besides, it's one of my favourite pleasures when I make the mine run, to see people discover, when the lift descends, to imagine them saying, hang on, there's something down there, to see that there's a gallery and to kneel down to watch the manoeuvres at the bottom of the mine.
de voir qu'il y a une galerie et de se mettre à genoux sur le sol pour observer les manœuvres au fond de la mine. Au point de vue technique,
From the technical point of view, it's the lift that caused me the most problems.
Autant le
The train, with its narrow track, I knew about that. I knew how to do that, but the lift, I'd never done anything like that, and it's the part of the layout which caused the most problem.
comme je ne suis pas...
As I'm not a great specialist in automation, this lift is actually completely manual. I control the raising and the lowering of the lift with the help of a potentiometer. There's no automatic stop. I have to watch the lift. It's directly opposite the rails if I'm to remove the trucks.
des rails pour sortir les wagonnets. J'ai eu la chance...
I was lucky enough to have the opportunity of visiting the site where they filmed Germinal. It was a revelation for me because I saw a miniature railway layout blown up to real size, and that really inspired me. Although the buildings aren't really the same, I was inspired by the atmosphere of the whole film set.
Cela m'a un peu inspiré, bien que les bâtiments ne ressemblent pas tout à fait, mais je me suis un peu inspiré de l'ambiance de ce site du tournage. J'aime bien qu'un réseau ait un nom.
I like a layout to have a name. It makes it more personal. I remember that I got the idea for this layout in summer '96, which was the summer of the hit single Macarena. So the idea came quite naturally, and I called the layout my Macarena Mine. And the really funny part is that sometimes, during exhibitions when I'm presenting my layout, people ask me, whereabouts is Macarena?
François, va te coucher maintenant.
Sur la carrière,
In the quarry there's a conveyor belt used for removing the slate debris. It's a little system driven by a motor that had to be specially designed so as to move as slowly as possible. I found that the most interesting thing in the German challenge, on the one hand, is the space allowed for the layout. And it's also the development of all sorts of techniques to create the weather defects, the age and the filth that's to be found today covering our factories. This layout is a free interpretation of a 60 centimetre gauge industrial railway, servicing the paper mills of Van Gelden and Sons. On the diorama, which scaled up would represent a 21 by 16 metre area, which is hardly larger than a Dutch garden, as Otto Schwoestra is fond of reminding us, we can witness the transport of wood from the storage area to the pulping shop. For the 1 in 35 scale, there's little material produced commercially, and consequently Otto Schwoestra has had to build everything himself, using both brass and photo-engraved nickel for the rolling stock, and various natural materials for the decor. For his contribution to the GM Voix Libre 1996 challenge, Jean-Pierre Carouguet wanted to get off the beaten track and create a layout on a rarely seen subject. The imposed dimensions were what initially orientated him towards zero-scale 14mm gauge track. It was while looking at a reprint of an old Decauville catalogue that he came across the various materials used in the harvesting of sugar cane. During a visit to the West Indies, he visited a number of abandoned plantations and was able to carry out an iconographic search for further information in the Port Louis Library. having decided on his subject and assembled his documents, it then remained only to draw up his plans for a layout that Jean-Pierre Carouget wanted to be spectacular. He chose 2 sites characteristic of sugar plantations: the fields of sugar, with the harvested cane being loaded onto trucks before transportation, and the weighing of the trucks and the transfer of the sugar cane from the train to the barge. The 2 sites were placed one above and slightly to the side of the other, linked by a helical ramp with an average 8% slope. Totally imaginary, but nonetheless spectacular. The ramp lets you see things from a different angle, for example a little wooden bridge, seemingly thrown haphazardly against the rock face, or the corbelled passage. Laying the track and the creation of the decors was achieved using classical techniques. Special attention was paid, however, to the creation of a tropical vegetation, which is what gives the layout its authentic feel and credibility. The various plants were created using carefully selected dried grasses and readily available brass kits. Wood was used to make buildings, together with the inevitable cart drawn by 2 zebu, here cleverly adapted with modelling paste from 2 plastic cows. The material for all the engines themselves was produced by various craftsmen in both France and England. The tubs and trucks were handmade by the designer using the images he'd copied from the archives during his research. Just imagine the heat of that tropical sun and the delicate aroma of rum floating over the island.
cette année, à nouveau,
This year I've again been involved in defining the rules of the competition. The dimensions of the layout were to be directly proportional to the width of the track. Again, I wanted to have the same fun as the other competitors, and I decided to build my own layout. I wanted to build my layout to N scale, where the width of the track is 3.5 millimeters, which, let me remind you, is a scale of 1 in 160.
le N, je le rappelle, c'est l'échelle 1/160e. À cette échelle, 3,5.
Using the scale, 3.5 millimeters gave me the dimensions of my layout: 10.5 centimeters by 14.
Bien sûr, à cette échelle,
Of course, it's almost impossible to motorise the shunter on this scale, so I had the idea of driving it using a system of cams.
l'idée d'animer ce réseau par un système de cam au centre du réseau.
In the centre of the layout, there's a geared down motor. On the axle of this motor, I fixed a cam, and at the end of this, there's the shunter, which appears almost to fly above the track.
Qui, donc, entre guillemets, vole au-dessus des voies. Les voies ne sont pas fonctionnelles.
The track is not functional. The dolly and the trucks haven't got wheels. With children, it's the first thing they notice. Their eyes are at just the right level. Adults never notice that. They're too tall.
Les adultes ne le voient pas, ils sont trop grands. Le réseau doit être
A layout should function, and to my mind that's more than just a simple backwards and forwards. There needs to be real movement. There has to be something going on. Then I got the idea of making a silo. The trucks are loaded from a hopper, the shunter pulls the truck to just below a second hopper, and the sand empties out into a wagon on a metric gauge track below.
de par une boulotte dans un wagon en voie métrique qui est situé en contrebas.
Since its creation on the hill known as the Hill of the Upright Stone 10 years ago, the Cielo Vista Hotel has seen its clientele steadily rising, thanks mainly to the wonderful climate. This gave rise to a large demand for transport, both of people and goods. The commune of Berlin, already served by the company Berlin et Environ, appeared to be a good starting point for a short railway line to provide a quick and efficient service for the hotel. At the request of Mr. X and Mr. Y, two gentlemen owning land within the company engineers began to study the project. 60-centimetre gauge track was chosen. The minimum radius for the bends, dictated by the sheer nature of the relief, 14 centimetres, and the steepest slopes were 8%. The line extension included only those buildings essential for the exploitation of the line. A wagon shed for the trucks and a workshop equipped with a forge and everything necessary for routine maintenance of the material. Apart from these buildings, the station also included a raised platform to allow travellers to enter the carriages. It's worth noticing that there's a water crane located at the station exit. It's obvious that the water storage capacity of the engines must be large enough for a complete round trip. The station terminal in front of the Cielo Vista Hotel has only 2 tracks, one of them appearing a little longer than necessary. In fact, the construction of the raised platform at this end of the line was left to the hotel owners, and they quite simply, in order to cut costs, built only a short, rather rudimentary platform. On the route itself, we can see an optional halt, giving a spectacular view of the valley. The track itself was laid by the company on sleepers made of oak and balsa wood. The points were also made by the company technicians. As well as 2 tunnels, the line also includes a bridge running over the valley of the upright stone. The bridge is a lightweight construction with both the framework and the sleepers in oak. We're delighted to welcome another customer, and we wish you a very enjoyable stay. Dear Mother and Father, you'd never believe the crowds at Karachi today. Baron came to welcome his cousin Bertha at the station. So there were people running all over the place. The local farmers had provided enough to fill a whole train. It's true that today was market day. Everything has to be delivered on time. You know how it is. Everybody was seething with impatience, waiting for a soldier on leave to finally meet up with his sweetheart. Marguerite, you know, the old boy Charles's prize cow. She didn't miss anything. After all, it was the only train of the day. The station master couldn't have been far. His bicycle was there, and I heard his whistle. Our engineer can at last get to the front of the train ready to leave. So I must go now. I've waited so long for this train. I don't want to miss it now. Affectionately, Bosworth. The Railway Video Library of Loco-Revue will be happy to share with you our love of scale model making in the next issues of our magazine, which is always full of hints and tips, with a dose of humour and a sprinkling of poetry, the poetry of our shared passion. In the next issues, you can visit the largest model layout in Europe ever made by one man, a man with a passion for the Chateau of the Loire, and a very small layout of a port where you can admire a tiny lorry hardly bigger than a thimble, but just as detailed as its bigger rivals. Should you have any remarks, suggestions, wishes, don't hesitate to share them with us. After all, this video library is really yours. We'll see you soon.